To begin with, what is state in general? Well, state is the quantifiable condition that something's in, meaning measuring what or how something is doing at a given time. You have state, a current state. Maybe you're 6 foot, both of your legs are functioning, you've just eaten your meal so you're full, maybe you have a bit of a cough, maybe you just took a nap so you're well rested. All of these things are variables about you that can be quantified and changed and assessed at any specific moment in time. And so some programs have state. If you have a variable in a program that tracks how many times the user has clicked on a specific button, let's say, and your page had just loaded for them, the state at the time of loading for that button would be 0. If you measured the state 10 seconds after, maybe the state of the button might be 3 or 4 or whatever. State can change. State can be quantified. State can be measured at any time. A snapshot of how something's doing, if you will. So ReactJS has the ability to manage the state of a web page or app. Why do we need this? Well, if we want our web page or app to be more than static, to change based on user input or external triggers like fetching information, and we don't want to be at our computer trying to write custom code to update the page each time something wants to change our page, which is impossible, by the way. If 100 people are viewing your page or your app, you can't possibly sit at home writing custom code for what each of them see. Then we need to make our program dynamic on its own and how it displays that information. This is why we need state. Based on the current state of the variables of a page or app at any given time, plus rules on how data in those variables gets displayed, state helps ReactJS display the page to the user in a dynamic way. So I have a basic ReactJS app up and running. If you don't know how to do that, I'll have a link in the description below or a card on the top right here. And so just a basic boilerplate ReactJS app. I've created a class component because, as you know, a class component can have state, a function component can't. All this app is going to do is on the front end, it gives us 2 numbers. We currently have 4 and 5 and gives us the sum of these 2 numbers. It allows us to update these numbers in these text boxes. We're going to call 2 functions here. Seemingly on the surface, they do the exact same thing, but the difference between them is the point of this video. It's going to highlight or show you guys how ReactJS is handling state. And then I have this last button here, which shows the current state of the app from the back end, so I can see it on the front end. So I click get me the numbers. We get number 1 is 4, number 2 is 5. So let's go to the back end. Let's step through that code. So how do we create a class component? Because class components can have state in React. How do we create that in React? Well, we create it exactly like JavaScript. It's just JavaScript. So we have the keyword class. We have the name of the class here. I called my numbers. You can name it whatever you want. I have extends or it inherits from something called React.components. And of course, every class needs a constructor. In this constructor, we call super, which calls the constructor of React.components. And then this is the meat of, you could say, the video. This is how ReactJS knows what the default state is, as well as where it mutates or updates the state of the component. This component is numbers. And so this is an object with key value pairs. And within this object, I've defined 4 default values. And this is the default state of my component numbers. I have 2 numbers, 4 and 5. If I change that guy to 0, saved, went to the front end, we get 0 plus 5 is 5. Let's change that back to 4. And I have 2 inputs or references to the inputs, and this just allows me to track what we type in here. I've then defined 4 functions here. Get numbers just lets me display what the current state of the app is on the back end to the front end so I can see it. I have get total, which returns the sum of these 2 numbers in state, not the property, these 2 nums right here. And then I have these 2 functions, which again, seemingly on the surface do the exact same thing. I'll explain their difference in a moment. And so all these 2 functions do is they update the state. Whatever numbers we put in the 2 text boxes, they update these numbers in the state right here. And then we have the render function, which returns all of the HTML or JSX that gets rendered to the front end that shows us this guy right here. And so with all that said, let's use the app. So let me clear the console. So currently, let me just refresh then. Why is it still 0? Did I not change it? I didn't save it. So let's save it. Let's go back, 4 and 5. All right. So currently, what's the current state of the app? Get me the numbers. Number 1 is 4, number 2 is 5, which is correct, and their sum is 9. Let's change those numbers to 2 and 3. So I want number 1 to be 2, number 2 to be 3. Let's click on Change Numbers. And what's going on? Why do we still have 4 plus 5 is 9? Well, let's see what the numbers are on the back end. Get me the numbers. We see number 1 is 2, number 2 is 3. So on the back end, the state is changing in the app. This is one of the ways, one of the major ways, ReactJS handles state. Let's go to the back end. So the difference between these two functions is this change numbers just made it an equivocation. So whatever I typed in these two boxes, it just changed the state directly. This update numbers, which I'll call in a second, it calls a specific function that tells ReactJS to update not only to update the state, so it does this, what change numbers does, it updates those numbers, but since we call this .setState, it says, hey, ReactJS, I also want you to refresh or to update the front end. So let's go back to the front end, and instead of using the change numbers, we're going to use the update numbers. So the current state of this app is, get me the numbers, is 2 and 3. You clear that. 2 and 3. Let's do 10 and 5. So 10, 5. Now instead of saying change numbers, I want you to trigger this.setState, and we get 10 plus 5 is equal to 15. And on the back end, of course, it updated the state. This is how this.setState works. This is one of the major ways ReactJS handles state. Let's talk more about this.setState because there's more to it. So this.setState expects you to return an object that replaces. So this is an object. Let me write it so it's a bit more direct. So this guy is an object. And so it expects you to return an object, this guy right here, that replaces values in this object right here. So not only can we write it like this, where we just simply return an object, you can write it as an arrow function. If you don't know what an arrow function is, I'll have a video or a link in the description below or a card in the top right. So we can write it as an arrow function, and a parameter or an argument passed into that arrow function is the previous state of the app. So you can work with the previous, or you can say at the time of you writing the code, the current state of the app before you update the state of the app. And so I usually call my variable here previous state. You can call it whatever you want. I call mine previous state. We have the arrow, and whatever happens in this .setState, you must return an object. Now, you don't need to return values in the object. You can return, so I'm going to return that guy. You could return something like this if you want to just do nothing. But you have to return an object. It expects an object. All right, let's clean this up. And so let's work with the previous state of the app. Let's say let new num. Let's do some better spacing. Let new num equal the previous state. So this previous state variable or object, that's this guy right here. It's the whole object right here. So if we wanted to access num1, num2, we just use object notation. So previous state.num1. Now new num is equal to the value of num1, which is the 4. So let's increase that guy by 1. So plus plus like this. All right, and we'll return, instead of returning whatever we type in the first text input, we'll ignore that. And we'll update the number 1 with the new num, which is always going to be 4 plus 1. So it doesn't matter what we enter for the first text field. Let's go to back to the front end. Let me do a refresh. So let's clear the console. What's the current state of the app? 4 and 5. Let's do 7. And again, that 7 gets ignored. We're not coding for it. Let's say 3. So what we should get is 4. So this first number is going to be 4 plus plus. So 5 plus 3 is 8. We should get 8 here. Click update numbers, and we get, why are we getting 4 plus 3 is equal to 7? This brings us to another way that ReactJS handles state. Let's go back to the back end. You cannot modify state directly. And so what we're doing here with this code is, it's abbreviated. Let me write out explicitly what this line is saying. It's saying let new num equal previous state.num, like that, 1 is equal to previous state dot num1 plus 1. So what this line is saying is let new num equal to modify previous state by incrementing by 1, and then that goes into new num. So right, this part of the code right here, we're modifying the state directly. We're increasing it by 1 directly. We can't do this. We need to copy it into a new variable or have a new reference to it and then modify the reference. So in order to write this properly, what we'd say is we could do something like this. We could fix it with a simple, there we go. So we're not actually increasing previous state.num by 1. We're just using it as a reference or as an additive for 1 and putting that in new num. Let's see what that looks like on the front end. So save, front end, refresh, current state of the app is 4.5. Let's say 7.3. Again, that 7 gets ignored. Now what we should get is 4 plus 1 is 5, plus 3 is 8. Update the numbers, and we get 5 plus 3 is 8. What's the current state of the app? Get me the numbers. we get 5 and 3. So again, this is another major way that ReactJS handles state. You cannot modify state directly. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. The main takeaways of this video, just understand that classes can handle state. We initialize default state in the constructor with something called this.state. I think it has to be called this.state. So we initialize default values. And if you ever want to change the state of the components, you have to use this.setState. You can't just equivocate or update the values directly like this. You have to use a function called this.setState. You can either return an object directly, or you can use the previous state beforehand using an arrow function and then return the object. Don't forget to give a like, subscribe if you haven't already subscribed, and I'll see you guys in the next React video.